Hey guys, tonight we begin with a tiny blue capsule called Valium, a pill that changed the modern world in ways nobody quite expected. A powerful sedative capable of turning ordinary people into slightly more agreeable, vaguely drowsy versions of themselves. The sort of people who might smile politely at someone spilling coffee on their lap without immediately plotting revenge. But before we pop open this tiny miracle of a sedative and drift into its absurd history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy these slow, absurd tales. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're lying right now, perhaps tucked under a blanket halfway between curiosity and sleep. Now, dim the lights, take a deep breath, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You, dear listener, are about to meet Valium in its historical context, a tiny blue capsule that quietly became one of the most influential drugs of the 20th century. Born in the 1960s, it was hailed as a miracle for nerves, a chemical lullaby that promised to calm anxiety, panic, and the daily stresses of modern life. Doctors called it a tranquilizer, a polite term that hardly hinted at the cultural and medical ripple it would create, from households to hospitals, and even into the very way society understood calm, stress, and personal control. It was supposed to be a friend, an assistant in capsule form, a tiny agent of calm that could walk beside you through sleepless nights, heated arguments, awkward family dinners, or the existential terror of realizing you've been staring at a blank wall for 3 hours. People loved it. Doctors adored it. The world embraced it with all the enthusiasm usually reserved for chocolate or minor miracles. Valium was marketed not as medicine, but as social lubricant. It was not only a cure for nerves, but a ticket to polite smiles, steady hands, and the quiet confidence that maybe, just maybe, the world was not conspiring against you at this exact moment. And oh, it worked. You pop one, and the immediate effect is subtle, almost polite. Your pulse slows, your thoughts soften, the jitter in your stomach resigns itself to an orderly cue. For a moment you float, blissfully untangled from your own anxious strings, imagining the 1960s streets buzzing faintly in the background with car horns, bicycles, and the distant rumble of buses that smell faintly of oil and ambition. People called it the mother's little helper, and yes, it earned that nickname honestly. Mothers, overwhelmed by the domestic whirlwind of screaming children, ticking clocks, and slightly judgmental neighbours, swallowed it like manna and discovered a kind of polite, patient superpower. You notice it in the office too, where a man adjusts his tie, swallows a capsule, and suddenly finds himself smiling serenely at a meeting that would have made his ancestors panic or faint. The secretary types softly, the typewriter keys clicking like gentle percussion, and you wonder whether the world has simply grown quieter, or whether everyone is just too sedated to yell. Doctors, the ones dispensing these tiny miracles with the gravity of people officiating royal ceremonies, scribble prescriptions and offer assurances that everything will be fine. You imagine the smell of linoleum floors, antiseptic and faint coffee, the gentle rustle of papers, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights above a waiting room filled with people who will soon find their nerves politely moderated, their panic subtly postponed. In cafes, men and women stir tea with calm deliberation, the aroma mixing with cigarettes and pastries, a background of polite murmur that no longer feels hurried, because perhaps nobody can quite remember what anxiety felt like before the capsule, or if they do, it seems quaint, almost theatrical. Outside, the world continues, unbothered and oblivious. Streetcars hiss, fog rolls over damp cobblestones, and the smell of coal smoke hangs like a promise in the air. But no one seems to mind as much anymore. Pedestrians shuffle politely around puddles, shoulders brushing, slight nods of acknowledgement replacing the frantic gestures of pre-Valium years. You sense it, the way a gentle current moves through the city, a quiet hum of controlled nerves threading through every living room, office and sidewalk. People smile too easily, laugh too calmly, nod too willingly, and somewhere in the distance, a pharmacist counts pills with a kind of cheerful detachment, unaware of the subtle web of dependence forming with each capsule dispensed. The pill is small, inconspicuous, but its influence spreads through society as easily as fog through an alleyway, wrapping each new generation in its soft, irresistible persuasion while you wander quietly, observing, noticing, almost lulled by the fonte absurdity of it all. The laboratories, the doctors, the homes, the cafes, the streets, they all blend together now, a single continuous tapestry of quiet ambition, mild panic, and chemical optimism. Somewhere in the haze of domestic kitchens, office lights and foggy streets, Valium moves effortlessly from hand to hand, from bottle to mouth, threading its way into the collective rhythm of everyday life, shaping the way the world inhales, exhales, and thinks about calm, as if tranquility itself were a commodity to be purchased in milligrams and swallowed politely. And so the story flows onward into waiting rooms, suburban kitchens, office desks and beyond, carrying the tiny blue miracle with it, ever expanding, ever quieting, never ceasing. The pharmacies begin to hum, softly, like beehives of modern serenity. You stand near the counter, pretending not to eavesdrop as a woman in a pale trench coat leans forward and murmurs, almost apologetically, that she's here for her refill. The pharmacist, calm as a monk, nods without judgment. Behind him, amber bottles gleam like trophies of tranquility. They line the shelves with perfect symmetry, a quiet museum of modern anxiety management. Somewhere, a clock ticks, but slowly, as if it too has taken its dose. The advertisements arrive next, bright, confident, and just a little desperate. Magazines beam with smiling women in crisp dresses, their hair impossibly composed. The text sings, "You can handle anything with Valium." Housewives, office clerks, overworked salesmen, all invited to rediscover calm as if it were a forgotten hobby. You flip through the pages, and it's all so soothing, so absurdly serene. A woman rests her chin on her hand, gazing dreamily out a window, the caption whispering, "For the minor stresses of modern living." You wonder what counts as minor, and whether the copywriter who wrote that line had ever met modern living in person. You step into a doctor's office. There's the faint smell of disinfectant and typewriter ink, and on the wall hangs a poster of the human nervous system, veins and synapses drawn in optimistic blue. The doctor, a man whose moustache could qualify as a small ecosystem, listens to your list of vague symptoms, tension, sleeplessness, the general inconvenience of existing, and nods gravely as though you've described a rare and noble affliction. He scribbles a prescription with the confidence of someone who's found the perfect answer. Take one as needed, he says, which you realise could mean anything between occasionally and constantly. And so it begins. Pills rattle in purses like lucky charms, resting beside keys, lipsticks and grocery lists. In kitchens they live in neat rows beside salt and sugar, the unofficial third seasoning of modern life. Morning routines acquire a new rhythm. Coffee, toast, calm. You see it in the small gestures. The steadying breath before a difficult phone call. The faint half smile when the baby cries again. The soft sigh of someone who finally feels normal, though nobody can quite define what normal ever meant. Television hums in the background. The world, once restless, now moves a little slower. Men come home from work less irritated. Women cook dinner with the grace of slow-moving clouds, and even the dog seems unusually composed, as if catching the mood through osmosis. You can smell roast beef and lavender-scented detergent, hear the dull, comforting rhythm of dishes being washed and radios whispering about progress, space travel, and the triumph of chemistry over chaos. You could almost believe the world has been cured of tension. But you notice something peculiar, the kind of detail that flickers at the edge of awareness. People begin to forget small things. The keys left indoors, the milk on the counter, the sentence that trails off halfway. No one seems particularly bothered by this. Forgetting feels like a new kind of peace. Conversations stretch, yawn, then fade away. A friend laughs at a joke that never quite finishes. You nod, smiling, because it's easier that way. In the evenings, you walk through quiet neighbourhoods where every window glows with the warm golden light of sedation. Inside, families sit in neat symmetry. Children doing homework, fathers reading papers, mothers sipping tea, but there's a stillness, an invisible softness that feels both comforting and eerie. The air itself seems medicated. If you close your eyes, you can hear it. The faint hum of television static, the click of a pill bottle cap, the slow, synchronized exhale of an entire generation learning how to relax. And still, no one calls it dependence. They call it balance. They call it modern medicine. They call it an achievement of science, a triumph over nerves, as if anxiety itself were some outdated superstition we could simply dose out of existence. The pharmaceutical, companies publish charts and smiling statistics, all neat and reassuring. The salesmen in grey suits shake hands with doctors, their briefcases gleaming with the promise of calm. You walk past them and catch a whiff of cologne, ambition, and freshly printed optimism. Everywhere you look, serenity sells. There's a quiet irony in the air thicker than cigarette smoke. The more tranquil people become, the more pills they need to maintain it. You notice it in the A's, soft, steady, untroubled, like glass marbles that have seen too much and decided not to react anymore. You keep walking through this new, peaceful world, feeling both comforted and slightly unnerved, as if you've stumbled into a polite dream that refuses to end. The pharmacy doors close behind you, the bell above them chiming gently, and the sound dissolves into the city's steady hum. The pill has left the laboratory, crossed the counter, entered the bloodstream of culture itself. And as you move through the streets, past neon lights, newspaper stands, and the faint smell of rain on pavement, you realise that calm, like smoke, has a way of spreading until you can't quite tell where it began or where it ends. By now, calm isn't just a feeling, it's a fashion statement. The word Valium starts slipping off tongues with a sort of chic reverence, like saying Chanel or Martini. You hear it at dinner parties between bites of overcooked roast and polite laughter. Someone says they're a little stressed. Another slides a small blue tablet across the tablecloth with the same casual grace as offering a mint. Nobody blinks. This is the new courtesy of the modern age. Hospitality, but medicated. Magazines stop treating Valium as medicine and start treating it as mood lighting for the soul. There are glossy features titled "How to Stay Calm in a World That Never Stops," complete with photos of serene women in turtlenecks staring to pastel horizons. One ad even calls it "the gentle aid for those who do too much." You imagine the copywriter smiling proudly, unaware that he's just defined the century. The pill seeps into music next. Singers hum about tranquil hearts, lonely nights soothed by little blue miracles. Even Frank Sinatra, king of cool himself, croons, "Mother's Little Helper" becomes more than a phrase. It's a soundtrack. Jokes about Valium sandwiches or tranquil lunches float through talk shows and cocktail bars. Everyone laughs, the way people laugh when they know the joke cuts a little too close. You notice a subtle shift in language. People stop saying I'm sad or I'm anxious. They start saying I need something. The distinction is small, but it changes everything. Emotions are no longer lived. They're managed. The vocabulary of feeling gets replaced by dosage and brand. And yet, the culture beams with optimism. We're told we've entered the age of emotional hygiene. Everything clean, balanced, under control. In offices, executives keep bottles in desk drawers next to pens and cigars. In suburban kitchens, mothers take half a pill before dinner to make the noise of the day feel softer, less jagged. On college campuses, students discover that calm can be crammed between lectures. The pills multiply, clone-like, finding their way into pockets, purses, glove compartments, each one a tiny promise of composure. Television sitcoms crack jokes about taking the edge off, but the laugh tracks sound a little too slow, a little too dreamy. Even the laughter feels dosed. The culture's rhythm has changed, no longer sharp, no longer urgent. Everything has a rounded edge. Conversations pause mid-sentence and never quite pick back up. The word calm begins to feel less like peace and more like surrender. Doctors, once gatekeepers, now resemble bartenders of tranquility. Prescriptions flow like champagne. The medical journals applaud the miracle of modern chemistry, and pharmaceutical executives toast their success in hotel lounges, convinced they've solved the problem of human emotion itself. One company even shows a woman gazing peacefully out a window, while the tagline reads, "For life's little upsets." The irony, of course, is that life's little upsets are what made life feel alive. And somewhere in the middle of all this serenity, a quiet unease begins to hum, barely audible, like static beneath the music. A handful of doctors start to notice that their patients aren't just calmer, they're emptier. They don't cry anymore, but they also don't laugh quite the same way. Sleep comes easily, but mornings arrive with a strange weightlessness, as if emotions had been gently sanded away. Still, the marketing keeps shining. The cultural machine hums on. The word dependence is avoided politely, like an embarrassing relative at a wedding. Because how could something that feels so harmless, so civilized, possibly be a problem? After all, nobody is drunk. Nobody is wild. Everyone is just fine. But the silence begins to grow. Behind manicured lawns and smiling advertisements, the world starts forgetting what fine actually feels like. And as the decade slides toward its dreamy middle, whereas everything seems balanced, muted, and perfectly reasonable, you can sense it. The first cracks in the calm, tiny but unmistakable, like the faint sound of glass under pressure. The calm lingers longer than it should. It starts to smell faintly of something stale, like perfume sprayed in a room with no windows. You notice it first in the morning. People move a little slower, eyes half fogged, smiles delayed by a second too long. The world feels cushioned, but also padded, as if wrapped in thick velvet that muffles both joy and panic. At first, nobody minds. After all, who complains about too much calm? The headlines still gleam with phrases like scientific peace and the modern cure for modern life. Yet in waiting rooms, whispers begin, patients asking for refills sooner than expected. Some confess to taking 2 pills instead of 1, because one doesn't feel like enough anymore. The doctors nod, scribble, smile. They too are calmer now. You begin to see little rituals forming. Housewives in pressed aprons lining up their day. 1 pill with coffee, 1 before lunch, 1 when the kids start shouting. Men pocket a few before meetings, just in case the world tilts too loudly. Even the family dog has learned the sound of the pill bottle, a soft rattle that means everyone will stop yelling soon. But calm, when overfed, becomes something else entirely. It starts to eat from the inside. People don't just relax, they dissolve. That woman who once knitted nervously through every evening now stares at the wall, half smiling, as if she's waiting for the wallpaper to make conversation. The man who used to hum while shaving no longer bothers. His razor glides over a face that seems borrowed. Everyone is smooth now, too smooth. When they miss a dose, though, the world returns too quickly. Hands tremble, hearts race. A single day without the pill feels like being dropped back into the raw machinery of life, all the squeaks, scrapes, and emotional rust suddenly audible again. So they take another, and the machinery quiets. The relief is instant, addictive, absolute. A few doctors, the stubborn ones, start asking questions. They notice patterns. Patients who can't stop, who can't sleep, who cry without warning when they try to quit. Reports start circulating in medical journals, but they read more like confessions than science. "We didn't mean to," they write. "We only wanted to help them rest." Meanwhile, the advertisements grow bolder. Glossy spreads show perfect families picnicking under clear skies, the mother gazing lovingly at a world that's been chemically declawed. The copy promises a calmer tomorrow. Nobody mentions that tomorrow might not come without a refill, in quiet kitchens and fluorescent offices. Drawers fill with forgotten bottles, half empty, half needed. People start borrowing pills from friends because everyone has some, and everyone swears they're just temporary. You hear them say, "I can stop any time," and you almost believe them, until you see the tremor in their fingers when they can't find the bottle cap. The doctors begin to whisper new words: tolerance, rebound, dependency. They sound almost polite, as if naming the problem might shrink it. But the truth seeps through the calm like a hairline crack through porcelain, invisible at first, then spreading fast. The miracle pill has become its own ritual of worship, and the altar is lined with prescription pads. And yet, society keeps smiling. The suburbs are still trimmed, the lawns still green, the kitchens still smell faintly of lemon polish and faint denial. Nobody wants to believe that calm could have a cost, so they hush the doubts, take another tablet, and tell themselves it's only medicine. Outside, the decade hums along. Soft music, polished cars, neatly pressed happiness. You can almost hear it. That quiet rhythm of pills tapping against glass, like rain on a rooftop that never stops. The calm breaks first in whispers, in letters written shakily by hand, in stories that begin the same way. I try to stop, but you can almost hear the sound of paper creasing, of confession folding itself neatly into envelopes that no one wants to open. Doctors start noticing patients who can't quite let go. A few who do try to quit describe it like falling off the edge of a dream. The ground feels too sharp, the air too loud, reality unreasonably solid. Their hearts race, palms sweat, and the night stretches on endlessly, a sleepless hallway with no door. Some even beg to be put back on the pills. "I'd rather live calm than live awake," they say. The medical journals change their tone. The words miracle and breakthrough quietly disappear, replaced by concern, long-term effects, and the polite panic of scientists realizing they've accidentally created dependence on a molecular level. Even the ads begin to sound nervous. A softer voiceover, gentler music, as if speaking too loudly might wake the truth. You start to see the contradictions everywhere. Newspapers still run ads calling Valium safe, mild, non-habit forming, while a few pages later there's a column about tranquilizer withdrawal. The editors pretend not to notice. The public doesn't want to. It's easier to stay dreamy. And yet, the stories keep spreading. A woman who fainted after trying to quit. A man who lost days in a fog so thick he forgot his own name. Behind suburban curtains, silence deepens. Families don't talk about it. They just refill prescriptions and hope the new dosage will feel normal again. Pharmaceutical companies release statements with all the sincerity of a fox apologising to a henhouse. We are committed to patient well-being, they insist, though the shareholders seem calmer than anyone else. Somewhere in a boardroom someone decides the problem isn't the drug, it's misuse. A convenient word, that one. It moves the blame sideways, off the chemistry and onto the chaos of human behaviour. You find yourself picturing those glossy ads from year ago. The serene mother, the perfect home, the husband reading the paper while a roast quietly overcooks. You can almost hear the faint tremor beneath it all, like static under the soundtrack of the American dream. The FDA holds meetings, long ones filled with cautious language and tepid coffee. Words like dependence and withdrawal syndrome are passed around, as if saying them softly enough might make them less real. But even bureaucracy can't stay calm forever. Reports pile up, numbers grow. Behind every statistic is a house that feels emptier than it should. And yet culture resists panic. The public doesn't riot. They don't burn the pharmacies or throw pills into rivers. They simply keep taking them. Because what else do you do when calm itself becomes the addiction? The tone of the decade starts to shift. The clean optimism of the 60s begins to fray at the edges, replaced by a jittery awareness that maybe, just maybe, the pursuit of serenity has gone too far. Pop songs about peace of mind start sounding like elegies. Television smiles begin to twitch. There's something uneasy about a country that can't sleep without swallowing its nerves. And through it all, Valium hums softly, still prescribed, still trusted, still adored, even as the evidence stacks up like unsent letters in a drawer. The calm no longer feels divine, it feels heavy, perfumed, artificial. You can taste it in the air, sweet, chemical, slightly metallic. The smell of comfort gone stale. By now the miracle has become routine, and the routine has become dependency. Nobody calls it that yet, of course. They just say they're used to it. But you can sense what's coming. The first tremors of a public reckoning, small at first, like cracks in porcelain spreading under the slow weight of denial. The newspapers are late to the story, as always. They arrive with headlines that sound surprised, as if the last decade hadn't been one long rehearsal for this revelation. Concerns mount over tranquilizer use, they declare in polite fonts, the kind used for garden fetes and royal weddings. Beneath those letters, the calm starts to crumble. You read about the housewives first, not the ones from the ads, with their perfect hair and serene smiles, but the real ones, sleepless, shaking, still in their bathrobes at noon. Some speak to reporters through nervous laughter, confessing they can't remember when they last felt anything naturally. It's like being underwater, one says, but the water's inside your head. The journalist nods solemnly, already thinking about the headline. Pharmaceutical spokesmen appear on television, reassuring everyone with the steadiness of men who've practiced their calm in front of mirrors. Valium remains safe when used as directed, they insist, which is rather like saying the ocean is safe if you stay in the shallow end forever. The audience claps politely, unsure whether to feel relieved or betrayed. Doctors find themselves on the defensive. Some admit they prescribe too easily, too generously. Others refuse to admit anything at all, arguing that addiction isn't a problem if the patient needs the drug. Language bends in strange ways to keep everyone comfortable. Nobody wants to be the villain in a story about peace. Meanwhile, the lawsuits begin to stir. The first are small, uncertain, filed by patients who lost years inside a haze of blue tablets. The testimonies are hauntingly similar. I just wanted to feel normal again. I couldn't stop. I didn't know it would be like this. Their stories unfold like half-remembered dreams, blurred at the edges by time and chemistry. Judges listen, juries sigh, and pharmaceutical lawyers polished and perfumed, argue that free will is a wonderful thing when properly medicated. You watch as culture turns slowly, awkwardly toward discomfort. The ads fade, the tone shifts. Those once pristine magazine spreads now look like artifacts from an alternate universe, one where people believed serenity could be swallowed. The bright women in turtlenecks start to look haunted, their pastel skies too smooth, too silent. But Valium isn't disappearing, it's merely losing its shine. The drug that once embodied elegance now drifts into something greyer, quieter, half-shamed. It becomes the thing people don't talk about at dinner anymore. The half-emptied bottle tucked behind the vitamins, still there, still needed, still whispering calm. Governments commission reports, committees, roundtables, all the furniture of moral panic. Experts gather to discuss the tranquilizer problem, though few can agree what the problem actually is. Some say it's overprescription, others dependence. A few whisper the obvious truth, that modern life itself is the problem, and Valium was only the polite bandage we wrapped around it. By now, you can feel the decade itself growing restless. The soft optimism of the post-war years has curdled into something more anxious, more sceptical. People start questioning not just the pills, but the whole idea that happiness should be effortless. Musicians sing about numbness. Filmmakers capture suburban despair in soft focus. Tranquility has become its own tragedy. And through all this, Valium remains, still prescribed, still popular, though the tone has changed. The word now carries a faint tremor, like something fragile in a glass case. It's no longer the future, it's the past, humming faintly in medicine cabinets across the world. In the hush between headlines, you hear it. The echo of a pill bottle closing somewhere far away. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the soft click of a civilization tidying up its nerves. By the time the 1980s wake up, everything smells faintly of carpet cleaner and self-improvement. The world has traded ashtrays for aerobics mats, martinis for mineral water, and the collective goal is no longer to relax, but to optimize. You can almost hear the pep in people's voices, that caffeinated confidence masking a national case of withdrawal. Valium, once the quiet king of comfort, now carries an odour of guilt, medicinal and slightly floral, like perfume that's gone off. Magazines that once called it the peace pill now use words like addictive, overprescribed, and outdated. The miracle has become an embarrassment, a relic of a too trusting age. Nobody admits to taking it anymore, though plenty still do. They just don't call it by name. You watch the culture perform its little exorcism. Doctors, newly enlightened, hold press conferences about new approaches to anxiety. There's talk of therapy, of mindfulness, of jogging in neon shorts. The very same clinics that once handed out Valium by the handful now hand out pamphlets on managing emotional dependence. You'd almost laugh if it weren't all so perfectly circular. But the truth is harder to jog off. People who try to quit discover that their calm has teeth. The withdrawal creeps up slowly, shaking hands, racing hearts, sleepless nights spent counting cracks in the ceiling. Some check themselves into hospitals, others just stay inside telling themselves it's the flu. The media, smelling a fresh scandal, pounces. America's hidden addiction, the headlines shout, as if the addiction had been hiding anywhere but in plain sight. Television specials feature tidy living rooms, weeping patients, and sympathetic doctors explaining that dependence isn't weakness, it's chemistry. Viewers watch from their couches, clutching their own prescriptions for something newer, safer, shinier. And that's when the next saviour quietly steps in. A cousin, chemically speaking. Smaller, faster, dressed in sleeker packaging. Its name rolls off the tongue like a sigh, Xanax. The laboratories beam again. A new generation of calm, they promise. Lighter, shorter acting, perfectly designed for the anxieties of modern life. You recognise the pattern immediately. The same old miracle, just in a tighter suit. Valium doesn't vanish, though. It lingers, like an old friend who still shows up to parties uninvited. Doctors prescribe it less, whispering the name instead of writing it proudly. The cultural glow fades, replaced by a faint nostalgia, the kind reserved for dangerous things that used to seem harmless. The blue pill becomes shorthand for an era of naivety, a time when science promised salvation and people actually believed it. You start hearing its name in songs again, but now as metaphor for numbness, for surrender, for suburban melancholy. It's no longer the soundtrack of calm. It's the warning bell. Writers describe it as a symbol of the quiet despair beneath polished lives. The word Valium turns poetic, tragic, almost beautiful in its failure. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical conferences carry on like nothing happened. Graphs go up, new compounds replace the old, and everyone pretends that chemistry is progress. The miracle machine never stops, it just changes flavour. There's always another molecule waiting in the wings, promising to fix what the last one broke. You walk through the decade's strange optimism, pastel suits, motivational posters, coffee breath and ambition, and beneath it all, you can still feel that same hum of calm, subdued, but not gone. The world has learned to move again, but not without a tremor. People have learned to smile again, but some smiles still look borrowed. Valium, meanwhile, sits quietly on pharmacy shelves, like a retired monarch, dethroned but not forgotten. It watches its younger cousins take the stage, remembering a time when peace itself had a prescription number. And though the world pretends to have moved on, somewhere in the folds of memory, that soft blue calm still waits, patient as ever. Decades pass, and yet the calm never really leaves. It just changes outfits. You can still hear its echo in modern life. Soft, polite, like a ghost wearing perfume. People say things like, "I just need something to take the edge off," unaware that they're repeating the same sentence whispered 50 years ago in doctors' offices with wood-panelled walls. The vocabulary remains, only the dosage changes. Valium has become an echo, a word people use half-jokingly, like, "I could use a Valium right now." They don't mean it literally, but the joke hides a truth. We still dream of escape, of that smooth, effortless peace. We've just replaced the pill with whatever the era allows: mindfulness apps, scented candles, weekend retreats promising digital detox. The chemistry of calm has gone boutique. Still, the cultural residue lingers. In novels, Valium becomes shorthand for quiet despair. In films, it's a prop, a blue capsule gleaming in a glass dish beside a silk robe, a symbol of luxury's loneliness. Songwriters still murmur the name with reverence, as though it were a spell that worked too well. Even in fashion editorials, the word sneaks in sometimes. Valium beige, they call a certain soft colour, calm commodified into hue. You notice how the tone of calm itself has changed. Where once people sought peace through sedation, now they chase it through stimulation. Endless scrolling, glowing screens, the white noise of productivity. The modern nervous system gets busy enough to forget itself. If Valium dulled the mind, its descendants merely distract it. The mechanisms differ, but the impulse is ancient. Silence the noise, soften the edges, find a way to survive the feeling of being alive. There's irony in how society still romanticizes that 1960s calm, the pastel kitchens, the poised mothers, the illusion of order. Nostalgia has a short memory. It forgets the tremors, the dependency, the quiet despair behind the lace curtains. It remembers only the aesthetics of serenity, not its cost. And so the cycle continues. New pill, new promise, new calm. Always improved, always temporary. The scientists move on, of course. The papers now speak of GABA receptors, benzodiazepine tolerance, and neuroadaptation. The language is cold, immaculate, the kind of precision that leaves no room for guilt. Chemistry, after all, doesn't apologise. It just recalculates. Meanwhile, the world outside grows louder. Airplanes, traffic, alerts, the perpetual hum of modern life. You wonder if maybe, in a strange way, Valium wasn't a mistake, just an early attempt to handle the unbearable speed of existing. A blunt instrument for a growing unease. Humanity's first real experiment in medicating the soul. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Not the pill bottle, but the rhythm it left behind. The societal sigh, the longing for a shortcut to peace. It hums beneath everything now, in boardrooms, in yoga studios, in whispered promises of balance. It's quieter, more sophisticated, but it's the same desire, the same hush, the same need to stop the internal noise, just for a moment. Valium may have lost its crown, but the kingdom it built never fell. The empire of calm endures, invisible, profitable, endlessly reinvented. And somewhere, on a pharmacy shelf that smells faintly of antiseptic and thyme, a forgotten box of blue tablets still waits, patient, perfect, as if it always knew the world would come asking again. You wander, half awake, through the laboratories of history, smelling faint antiseptic, heated glass, and the lingering aroma of ambition. Valium wasn't just a pill. It was a lens through which science learned to see human nerves differently. Doctors began thinking in molecules and pathways, in electrical hums and chemical whispers, noticing patterns that nobody had noticed before. Anxiety was no longer a vague, poetic concept. It was quantifiable, measurable, manipulable. You can almost hear them scribbling notes, their pens scratching like tiny horses on paper, their brains lit up with the thrill of discovery. What if panic is just a misfiring receptor? What if fear can be softened? In the hospitals, patients were suddenly not merely anxious. They were GABA deficient, receptor challenged, subtly misaligned with the nervous rhythm of the universe. And Valium, that polite blue capsule, became the tool, the scalpel, the tiny engineer of calm that could recalibrate a mind. The language of psychiatry shifted subtly. Instead of moral failings, they now spoke of neurochemistry. Instead of nerves being frightful or weak, they were hyperactive or imbalanced. The world became measurable, diagnosable, and treatable in milligrams. You notice the scientists themselves, leaning over microscopes, swaying faintly to the hum of fluorescent lights. They're excited, of course, but there's a certain irony. In their pursuit of calm, they've unwittingly rewritten the manual for living. Every dose of Valium is both a therapy and a signal. A way of saying that the normal human state might just be too loud, too intense, too inconvenient. The brain, once a mysterious cathedral, is now a factory line of neurotransmitters, waiting for a gentle nudge. Research proliferates. Studies on tolerance, on receptor downregulation, on withdrawal symptoms all appear with the same rigour as a chess tournament. Systematic, methodical, yet somehow strangely detached. The patients become numbers in a ledger of human nerves, each row a soft confession, dosage, frequency, response. The real-life drama of trembling hands, sleepless nights, and sudden tears is reduced to columns and charts. You imagine the scientist adjusting graphs as casually as a pianist moves a finger across ivory keys, unaware that the music they play is someone's life. The medical schools adapt quickly. Students learn the chemical language of calm like a foreign tongue, repeating benzodiazepine and GABA agonist until it tastes like sugar on the tongue. Professors speak in measured monotones about half-lives, peak plasma concentrations and receptor affinities. The textbooks are meticulous, spotless, and strangely hypnotic, with diagrams that could be mistaken for abstract art if you squint just right. Students memorize the words, but rarely the lives beneath them. And yet, in the quiet wards, you can feel the human cost. Patients are calm, yes, but also flattened, softened, sometimes unrecognizable to themselves. You witness it in the blank stare of a woman waiting for therapy to begin, the tremor of a man who's forgotten how to laugh naturally. The science of calm works beautifully, but it has an elegance that borders on cruelty. Precision never asks permission. It only applies. By now, Valium has inspired generations of research. Other drugs follow in its footsteps, each designed to perfect the formula. Faster, stronger, subtler. The field of psychiatry becomes increasingly dependent on these tiny miracles, or perhaps these tiny seductions. Emotional disorders are no longer sins, flaws, or failures. They're chemical equations to solve, variables to adjust, inputs to modulate. You sense the irony. The quest to normalize nerves has in many ways normalized dependence itself, and yet the world thanks them quietly. Anxiety is no longer shouted at dinner tables or dramatized in literature. It's politely measured, managed, dosed. Life hums along with a smoother cadence, less thrilling perhaps, but undeniably more predictable. The legacy of Valium is both profound and invisible. It rewrote the map of human emotion, replaced instinct with chemical rhythm, and reshaped the very idea of what it means to feel calm. Outside the laboratories, in everyday life, the echo remains. Therapy sessions now speak the same chemical language, casual discussions reference dosage and timing, and the expectation of calm, of manageable nerves, is baked into culture. People have grown up thinking calm is something to be engineered, not earned, and the blueprint of that worldview carries faint fingerprints of the blue pill that once promised serenity in a capsule. And so, you wander through this landscape of science and culture, feeling the quiet resonance of a pill that taught the world to see nerves as circuits, moods as chemicals, and calm as something that could be dispensed. It's an invisible revolution, elegant, clinical, and, in its own way, endlessly hypnotic. Valium reshaped the human mind not with spectacle or violence, but with quiet persuasion, one molecule at a time, leaving behind a world that will never experience calm quite the same way again. The world outside the laboratories hums with subtle echoes of the blue pill. You notice it in the suburbs first, houses lined neatly, curtains drawn, children quiet in their high chairs while mothers sip coffee with the faint buzz of calm pulsing beneath polite smiles. People move in synchrony, their nerves softened, conversations measured. The very rhythm of domestic life has absorbed a chemical metronome. Media amplifies the effect. Television shows feature characters whose anxieties are neatly managed, whose crises resolve with soft sighs instead of dramatic tears. Films paint the edges of conflict in pastel colours, humour and tension carefully calibrated so that nobody leaves the theatre more awake than they arrived. Even the radio hums gently in the background of morning routines, each note tuned to a society increasingly habituated to a quiet, predictable calm. And yet, the pill does not distribute itself evenly. You see patterns in the demographics. Suburban mothers first, office workers next. college students discovering the quiet thrill of sedated focus. It migrates like a river, meandering through neighbourhoods, workplaces and clinics, leaving behind people slightly smoother, slightly quieter, slightly less startled by life's sharp edges. Some embrace it eagerly, others reluctantly, all shaped by its gentle insistence. Advertising adapts seamlessly, learning from decades of subtle persuasion. Magazines, billboards, and television ads promote calm as a lifestyle choice, wrapped in smiles and muted colours. The pill is no longer just medicine. It becomes accessory, conversation starter, cultural shorthand for modernity itself. Feeling stressed? A soft voice asks from the pages of a magazine. There's a solution for that. You see it everywhere, in print, in pharmacies, in whispered remarks at cocktail parties. Calm is no longer private. It is social currency. Schools too feel the effect. Teenagers mention Valium in passing, usually as a joke, though you sense it's sometimes less jest than truth. The idea of chemically managed calm seeps into the collective consciousness. Adults who grew up in Valium-saturated households carry that expectation into their own parenting, perpetuating the cycle. Emotional discomfort becomes something to treat, something to smooth over, rather than something to experience. You notice generational patterns too. The children of the 1960s and 70s inherit a quiet, almost imperceptible structure of sedation. They enter adulthood with the expectation that stress is manageable, preferably with a discreet helper in a small blue capsule. When they encounter the modern world, bright, loud, digital, their inherited tolerance for anxiety is lower, their instincts for coping a little dulled. The pill has left its mark, not just chemically, but culturally, woven into the social DNA. The workplace is a subtle theatre of calm. Meetings run on schedules and soft-spoken instructions, nerves muted with socially approved restraint. Employees who remember the pre-Valium era shake their heads quietly, noting the difference, while younger colleagues assume this is simply how life should feel. Orderly, polite, managed. Panic is politely deferred, tension is discreetly padded, and human unpredictability is engineered into acceptable channels. Even nightlife begins to carry traces of sedation. Cocktail bars and lounges offer dim lighting, soft jazz, and carefully measured ambience. People move with a faintly softened gait. Conversations hover in polite decibels, and laughter carries a gentle weight rather than sharp joy. Valium's influence has seeped into mood, movement, and social rhythm, a chemical choreography of civility and quiet pleasure. Internationally, the ripple spreads. Though legislation and cultural attitudes vary, the template of chemical calm travels easily. Other countries observe, adapt, and produce their own versions, importing both the practice and the expectation that anxiety is manageable, preferably with a little help from science. Across oceans, the pill becomes a blueprint, a subtle instruction manual for civilized behaviour in an increasingly anxious world. And so the society hums along, smooth on the surface but quietly structured by decades of chemical moderation. You notice it in the small details, the measured steps of pedestrians, the muted exclamations of surprise, the way people negotiate discomfort without ever truly exploding. Valium's legacy is everywhere, even when forgotten. A silent architecture of calm embedded in rhythm, culture, and expectation. The pill has become invisible, yet its influence lingers, shaping not only moods but patterns of living, parenting, work, and leisure. And somewhere, in medicine cabinets and cultural memory, the faint hum of its presence continues, a quiet testament to the world's enduring desire for peace, no matter how it comes. You start noticing the faces behind the numbers, Not the smiling ads, not the pastel magazine spreads, but real people, trembling hands, quiet confessions, unsteady voices. A housewife whispers in a living room where the light falls perfectly on polished tables, "I don't even remember the last time I felt anxious." Naturally. And you realise that's exactly the problem. The anxiety didn't disappear. It was just outsourced to a small blue capsule. The tabloids have a field day when scandals begin to leak. Celebrities, politicians, even doctors themselves, caught in private admissions of overuse, prescription juggling, and the occasional public fainting spell. Headlines scream "tranquilizer trap" or "calm that cost millions." You imagine journalists sharpening their pens, sniffing the air for the faintest tremor of human drama. It sells, of course. People want to see perfection falter, especially when it falls in a soft, sedated haze. Courtrooms hum with quiet indignation. Lawsuits are filed not just against companies but against complacency itself. Patients describe withdrawal with the precision of horror poetry. I felt as if my own thoughts were breaking into shards, my body rebelling in tremors, my mind screaming in polite tones no one could hear. The lawyers nod, adjusting glasses, occasionally scribbling notes, fascinated by the contradictions of chemical calm. Relief and terror in the same capsule. You hear the stories in whispers too. A young woman recounts the first time she skipped a dose, how the walls suddenly vibrated with sound, how the heart, usually obedient, galloped like a wild horse. A man talks about nights spent awake in a haze, staring at ceilings that resemble clouded water, wondering how long one can survive being calm yet entirely unanchored. The narratives drift into each other, like fog folding over itself. They are endless, intimate, hypnotic. Yet public perception is complicated. Valium was still revered by many as a miracle, the friend who steadied nerves, the quiet companion of lonely nights. Even as scandals multiply, the pill is defended, rationalized, normalized. It's safe when used properly, people say. And you realize that properly is a flexible term, often bending to social convenience, corporate interest, or private desperation. The media oscillates between fascination and fear. Late-night television segments dramatize dependence with solemn music, while daytime talk shows encourage polite acknowledgement and reassurance. You watch as society negotiates a delicate dance. Condemnation tempered with nostalgia, criticism softened with curiosity, horror tempered with humour. The stories are everywhere, yet never fully confronted. Meanwhile, in suburban streets and urban apartments, the quiet continues. People ration, double dose, borrow from friends, all while maintaining the polished exterior. Children observe these patterns, internalize them, and later, unconsciously, mimic the expectation that calm can be engineered. It's a choreography of survival, passed silently from generation to generation. And through all this, the pill remains invisible in everyday life. A drawer in a bedroom, a bottle on a nightstand, a prescription quietly renewed. The human cost is quiet, unglamorous, uncelebrated. It hums softly under polite laughter, behind smiles, beneath the fabric of ordinary existence. You realize that the drama, the trembling, the public scandals are only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface, millions live in gentle chemical suspension, drifting through decades in softened, muted patterns of life. In this quiet, ongoing story, humour lingers, a crooked smile at the absurdity of needing a molecule to manage nerves, at the polite ritualization of relief. And yet, beneath the amusement, there is melancholy, a recognition that serenity purchased at the cost of natural emotion leaves a strange residue in the soul, subtle but undeniable. And somewhere, in a small pharmacy cabinet, the capsule waits. It hums with history, culture, science, and consequence. Patient, persuasive, eternal in its quiet influence. You hear it in whispers, in the tremor of a hand, in the sigh of someone who has never quite experienced calm on their own terms. The world hums differently now, but the hum carries a familiar undertone. Valium. You notice it crossing oceans quietly, slipping into Europe on slow trains, into Japan via glossy magazines, into cities and towns that never asked for a miracle but got one anyway. The culture of calm spreads like a whisper, subtle but insistent, carried in pharmacy bottles, medical conferences, and the soft instructions of doctors whose handwriting seems to lull you before you even read the words. In Europe, the pill is embraced with a faintly ironic elegance. Housewives in Paris take it behind lace curtains, nodding politely to the sound of the metro below. Bank clerks in Zurich manage their nerves with precise doses between balancing sheets. Even the cafes of Rome smell of espresso and discreet chemical reassurance. Each country adds its own seasoning to the ritual, in some more privacy, in others more casual confession. Yet the underlying current is unmistakable. The world is learning to outsource calm, one capsule at a time. Japan adapts it differently. There, the culture of meticulous order and quiet obedience harmonizes perfectly with the idea of chemical calm. Offices move in measured hums. Employees sip tea while a pill smooths the edges of long hours. The language itself accommodates this new rhythm. Anxiety, once private and personal, now speaks in polite, muted terms. Valium is not rebellion, not indulgence, but an accessory to conformity, subtle, effective, almost invisible. In Latin America, adoption is slower, whispered, yet no less pervasive. Doctors prescribe with caution, families pass along anecdotes of quiet relief, and the cultural narrative folds itself around the promise of serenity. The streets remain loud and chaotic, but homes absorb the calm carefully, like a secret treasure hidden in medicine cabinets. The pattern repeats: smooth exterior, controlled interior, small capsules acting as bridges between turbulence and civility. Even in Africa and the Middle East, where medicine often battles scarcity, Valium finds its place in clinics and hospitals, prescribed cautiously, recommended selectively. It becomes a tool of modernity, a whisper of a world that values composure, a gentle nod toward the promise that nerves can be engineered to cooperate. Wherever it goes, it carries both relief and subtle dependence. Quiet, polite, invisible, shaping societies in ways no one fully accounts for. Media internationalizes the narrative. Films, television, and magazines showcase tranquilized perfection. Mothers poised, workers measured, professionals composed. Everyone seems calm, civilized, modern. You can almost hear the faint click of pill bottles hidden behind wardrobes in Buenos Aires, Oslo, Tokyo, as if society has collectively rehearsed serenity. Yet underneath the surfaces, tension simmers. Dependence is silent but present. Global culture begins to internalize the expectation of engineered calm. Art, literature, fashion, all reflect a world where nerves are smoothed, emotions are managed, and unease is politely discouraged. Anxiety is no longer purely personal. It is culturally moderated, subtly guided by decades of chemical precedent. Valium's influence is now invisible, pervasive, and oddly democratic. It touches all classes, all continents, all quiet corners of human aspiration. You realize that the pill has created a shared understanding. Calm is a commodity, purchasable, manageable, repeatable. A global language of sedation hums beneath the bustling cities, quiet suburbs and remote villages. People nod knowingly at its existence, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously, as if everyone participates in a silent choreography taught decades earlier by molecules, doctors and advertisements. And yet, as you wander through this map of quiet human adaptation, you notice subtle traces of resistance, underground discussions, alternative therapies, movements advocating natural emotion, mindfulness, and the right to feel unmoderated. These countercurrents are faint, fragile, like wind rustling through tall grass but persistent. Even a pill that shaped the world cannot fully erase the human desire to feel unmediated life. Valium's legacy is everywhere, invisible threads weaving through homes, clinics, workplaces and cultures. It is the quiet ghost of modern calm, a molecule that shaped expectations, social rituals and global culture without ever asking for applause. And somewhere, in distant pharmacies across continents, boxes of soft blue capsules sit patiently, silently humming the story of a world that learned to outsource serenity. The decades roll on, and the pill is no longer front-page news. You can still find it in medicine cabinets, quietly aging beside bottles of vitamins and forgotten prescriptions. But its cultural glory has been quietly reassigned to its younger cousins. Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, smaller, faster, slicker, each promising relief with a new kind of polish. You notice the pattern immediately. Valium may have been the pioneer, but the world demanded evolution, efficiency, instant gratification. Its heirs are sleek, discreet, marketed with clinical charm. You wander through modern life, noticing the subtle traces of that old blue calm. Anxiety is everywhere, but so is its management. Mindfulness apps ping softly, yoga studios hum, therapy sessions are carefully scheduled. People measure their stress like they measure their calories or steps. And in the background, almost imperceptible, lies Valium's shadow. A legacy that whispered decades ago that calm could be purchased, that nerves could be tamed chemically, that quiet was possible if only you were willing to surrender a little control. You read contemporary studies in hushed tones, fascinated and slightly alarmed. They speak of benzodiazepine prescriptions declining in some countries, rising in others, dependence patterns shifting with age, gender, socioeconomic status. Modern clinicians debate best practices, taper slowly, prefer therapy, avoid overprescribing. And you realize that the world has learned from Valium, learned yes, but not without scars. The chemical template remains, etched into medicine, policy, and social expectation. The media treats anxiety like a commodity now, not a secret. Podcasts whisper about mental health, influencers share routines for calm, and TikTok dances can be therapeutic in a millisecond. Society still craves tranquility, but the tools have diversified. Blue capsules, green apps, guided meditations, all exist to fill the same gap Valium once promised to fill alone. You smile faintly at the irony. Humans are endlessly inventive at finding ways to quiet their own minds. Yet the shadow lingers. Valium shaped how modern culture thinks about calm, stress, and normality. It taught us that emotional states are negotiable, that pharmaceutical intervention is acceptable, that society can outsource the management of nerves. Its presence is felt in the careful structuring of workplaces, the scripting of therapy sessions, even the quiet design of suburban life. Stress, once natural and untamed, has become a puzzle to solve, a variable to measure, a problem to engineer away. You notice traces of it in language too. People joke, almost reflexively, about needing a Valium moment before meetings, social events, or awkward family dinners. They rarely mean the pill itself, but the concept is embedded. Calm is purchasable, replicable, necessary. You hear echoes of the 1960s advertisements in every sigh, every polite deferral of emotion, every carefully curated moment of composure. The world has learned to replicate serenity, and you feel the weight of that lesson, useful, comforting, yet faintly unsettling. And so, modern anxiety is both ubiquitous and manageable. The cycle repeats. A generation learns to recognize stress, medicates or moderates it, passes along techniques or prescriptions, and the architecture of calm evolves. Valium may not dominate the headlines anymore, but it shaped the blueprint. It taught the world that peace could be engineered, and that lesson endures, quietly, invisibly, in every corner where nerves meet expectation. The pill itself sits quietly, unassuming, as you wander past pharmacies and clinics, past the glow of apps and soft therapy rooms. You imagine its molecules humming faintly, an invisible choir of lessons learned, that serenity is desirable, that humans will always seek it, that chemical peace is seductive and persistent. Somewhere in that quiet, the story of Valium meets the present, and the world, slightly calmed, carries on, humming in subtle resonance with the ghost of a blue capsule that once promised everything and delivered both relief and consequence. You notice how Valium has become something almost mythic in modern culture, a symbol rather than just a medicine. It exists in memory before pharmacy, in literature before prescription bottles. People speak of it in anecdotes, in jokes, in fleeting references to the blue pill that tamed the world. You smile at the absurdity. A tiny capsule, once banal, now carries the weight of decades of desire, relief and quiet control. Artists and writers flirt with it in metaphor. A character's limp optimism, a soft sigh in a novel, a painting in muted blues, all can evoke Valium without a single molecule present. The pill has become shorthand for calm, for sedation, for the very notion that human emotion can be managed. You recognise the subtle humour in this. Humans, always dramatic, have assigned epic significance to a chemical whisper. Nostalgia adds a gentle haze. People look back at the 1960s and 1970s with fondness for what seems like effortless serenity. Pastel kitchens, tidy suburban streets, polite smiles. The advertisements, once polished and persuasive, are now artifacts, amusing, slightly tragic, and strangely charming. You imagine someone in a modern apartment scrolling through old magazine pages, sighing at the thought that people once believed happiness could be swallowed in a blue capsule. Yet beneath the nostalgia there is irony. The calm that was once chemically induced is now culturally performed. Yoga, mindfulness, meditation, and even social media trends echo the same pursuit: engineered tranquility. Society continues to search for serenity in curated routines and interventions, almost as if unconsciously honouring the blueprint Valium left behind. The methods have changed, but the desire remains intact, fossilised in collective habit. You wander through fashion and media, noticing pastel palettes, soft focus photography, and carefully arranged domestic interiors. Subtle nods to the aesthetic Valium helped popularise. Even the mundane act of sipping tea or lighting a candle becomes ritualised, a miniature homage to the idea that calm is attainable, repeatable, and socially approved. Somewhere in these details the world remembers the pill's legacy, even if it doesn't remember the molecule itself. The humour persists, soft and ironic. Consider the absurdity of assigning moral weight to tranquility. One generation demonises the pill, another elevates the experience, and yet both are chasing the same whisper of relief. You laugh quietly at the subtle absurdities. Humans dramatise peace as if it were scandal. commodify serenity as if it were luxury, and mourn the loss of chemical calm even while embracing other modern forms. Valium has become cultural shorthand for compromise. It represents the negotiation between desire and discipline, comfort and consequence, the human impulse to soften the sharp edges of life. You notice how references appear in music, literature, and casual conversation. A wink to those who remember, a curious term for those too young to know. The word hums faintly in consciousness, a gentle reminder that modern calm was once bought, measured, and administered in tiny blue capsules. And through all this you sense its subtle poetry, the quiet persistence of human longing, the layered humour in our attempts to manage our nerves, the cultural choreography of desire and restraint. Valium's ghost hovers over decades of thought, shaping perceptions, influencing habits, and leaving traces in places you might never expect. The pill is no longer just a drug. It is a story, a symbol, a shared human touchstone, quietly echoing in the rhythm of contemporary life. Somewhere, in the stillness of a pharmacy drawer, in a dusty textbook, in a memory shared across generations, the blue capsule waits, not to act, not to perform, but to remind that the pursuit of calm is as old as society, as persistent as human nerves, and as quietly absurd as everything we do to survive them. You pause, not in a literal sense, but in a reflective drift, noticing the strange, winding lessons the world has learned from a tiny blue capsule. Dependence, calm, relief, and obsession all mingle quietly in human experience. You realize that Valium was never just a medicine, it was a mirror held up to society, reflecting both our cleverness and our fragility, our ingenuity and our desire for shortcuts. The moral landscape is slippery. Is reliance a weakness or a survival strategy? You watch history ripple across decades, early adopters hailed as enlightened, later users whispered about as fragile, and the modern inheritors of chemical calm shrug, often unconsciously continuing patterns they didn't choose. The lines between relief and indulgence, necessity and luxury, blur like watercolour in rain. You feel a certain irony. Humans invented chemical peace, and then judged themselves for using it. You wander through anecdotal landscapes. A college student pops a pill to steady racing thoughts before finals, unaware that her great-grandmother once did the same before a PTA meeting. A nurse administers medication with gentle efficiency, reflecting on the balance between ethics and practicality, compassion and convenience. Even the scientist who pioneered benzodiazepines probably never imagined the subtle moral choreography their creation would orchestrate. A quiet ballet across homes, clinics, and offices worldwide. The humour persists, soft and wry. You imagine a philosopher sipping tea, scribbling furiously, declaring that human anxiety is a chemical problem now solved with convenience, while secretly wishing for the chaos of unmediated nerves just to feel alive. You chuckle quietly at the absurdity, the simultaneous genius and folly of a species so clever that it can engineer calm, yet so human that it cannot resist judging itself for it. And yet, there is poetry here. Dependence in its quiet, persistent way reminds us of our limitations, our fragility, and the strange beauty of imperfection. Calm, whether chemical or practiced, is never free. It is borrowed, negotiated, sometimes purchased, sometimes hard-earned. Valium embodied that negotiation, offering relief, promising mastery, yet leaving subtle traces of its power behind, echoes that hum in human behaviour long after headlines have faded. You notice the cycles, repeating softly like tides: invention, adoption, overuse, reflection, innovation. The pill taught the world a lesson in subtlety. The human desire for calm will always find an outlet, whether through molecules, mindfulness, music, or meditation. Every generation interprets it differently, yet all recognize the same need: to quiet the restless machinery of the mind, even if only temporarily. In philosophy, in literature, in whispered conversations, the question remains: how much of life should we smooth over? How much discomfort is necessary? How much optional? Valium's legacy is a quiet nudge, a reminder that every shortcut carries its shadow, every solution its subtle price, every calm its impermanence. And yet, despite these complexities, humans persist, adapt, and laugh softly at the absurdity of needing a molecule to manage nerves that have always been so keenly alive. Somewhere, in the quiet folds of memory and medicine cabinets alike, the blue capsule remains, not an answer, not a saviour, but a teacher in its own patient, persistent way. It hums lessons of dependence, of desire, of human ingenuity, and of the quiet absurdity that defines much of human life. You drift among these reflections, feeling both the melancholy and the irony, sensing that calm, in any form, is a story humans will continue to write, consume, and sometimes surrender to indefinitely. You drift slowly now, carried by the faint hum of history, medicine, and human desire. The story of Valium stretches before you like a river seen from above, winding, reflective, glinting in the sunlight of memory, yet disappearing quietly into the fog of modern life. You notice how small, ordinary things carry its legacy. A polished kitchen counter, a carefully folded prescription, a whispered joke about needing a Valium moment. The world has learned, adapted, and continued. Anxiety persists, of course, but so does ingenuity, so does creativity, so does the endless human search for calm. You sense the rhythm of generations moving in soft waves. Mothers and fathers, students and workers, artists and thinkers, all part of an invisible choreography orchestrated in part by a tiny blue capsule that once promised serenity and a simple swallow. You realize that history is not merely in textbooks or laboratories. It lives in gestures, in habits, in culture itself. The pill has vanished from the headlines, yet it hums in faint resonance everywhere. In casual remarks, in therapy sessions, in the quiet sighs of people negotiating life's sharp edges, it whispers the same lesson. Calm is desirable, relief is seductive, and every solution carries its echoes, visible and invisible. You wander through imagined streets of the past and present, feeling the pulse of a world shaped by molecules, science, and human longing. There is humour, of course. Absurdity at the notion that such a small thing could wield such influence. You smile faintly at the irony. Humans, clever and fragile, always inventing solutions for their own nerves, always negotiating peace with one another and themselves. And still there is comfort in the persistence of calm. It is not absolute, not permanent, not without cost, but it exists. A mother's hand steadied, a nervous laugh softened, a sleepless night gently muted. The world continues its slow, measured hum, carrying the echoes of Valium in rhythm and pattern, in culture and habit, in the quiet desire for serenity that has always been part of being human. The pill itself remains patient. In a pharmacy drawer, in a dusty textbook, in someone's memory, it waits, unassuming, unhurried, a quiet testament to ingenuity, desire, and consequence. It does not shout, it does not demand, it doesn't judge. It simply exists, a subtle companion to the unfolding story of humanity's attempt to soothe itself. And as you drift further, guided by the lingering pulse of thought, history, and gentle reflection, you feel the world slow down. The streets, the offices, the kitchens, the clinics, all recede softly into a background murmur. Your thoughts follow, quieting, smoothing, as if guided by the invisible hand of a molecule that once promised calm and left behind a legacy far larger than itself. You breathe in the quiet, and for a moment it is enough. The hum of human striving, the pulse of science, the whisper of culture, and the subtle legacy of Valium fold together in gentle symmetry. The story dissolves like mist at dawn, leaving only the soft, persistent rhythm of life. Calm, measured, and slightly ironic. And somewhere in the folds of memory and time, the tiny blue capsule rests, patient and enduring, a silent companion to the unending human pursuit of peace. Good night.